Klausmeier, State Policy Director. I'm sitting in Washington, D.C. today with Jennifer Gable, our Communications Associate. Thanks for that quick rundown, Jesse and Andrea. Appreciate that. It is interesting to see the year of 2000 in state houses across the country. I think what we've seen, as many of you can probably report to us as well, been a little bit more activity in some of the state houses on workforce investment, on workforce funding, on policies that encourage sector partnerships and career pathways, and these accelerated learning models have really taken hold this session. And then, of course, as we know, there's a number of states who invested some significant funds in workforce. And, you know, it's good to see states sort of figuring that out and stepping up to the plate because given the challenges of federal funds and the reduction in federal funds, certainly states are going to need to close the gap, whether it's a skills gap, a funding gap. States, to win the economic day, may have to take a little bit more initiative. So a lot of activity in a number of states. Not everything passed. Some things did, some didn't. And there were some lessons learned and some great challenges and opportunities developed this year. So I want to thank our panel for joining me today. And the panelists that we are joining us today are Elizabeth Creamer, Director of Education and Workforce Development in the Office of Governor McDonnell in Virginia. Welcome, Elizabeth. We also have Sarah Gray Ramsey. Sarah is the Advocacy Officer at the United Way of Central Iowa. And then shortly, if she hasn't joined us already, Senator Katherine Klausmeier from District 8 in Maryland will be joining us to talk a little bit more about their state. She'll be joining us soon. So what we want to do is spend a little bit of time drilling down. We gave you a couple of quick overviews of California, Indiana, Colorado, and a few other states, but we want to drill down a little bit to see exactly what happened in these three particular states to see if there's something that participants can glean on the line. So we're going to go to Iowa first, and we're going to go to Sarah Gray Ramsey with the United Way in Central Iowa. Sarah, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, so you all have been very active this session in 2013, and what were some of the issues going on in Iowa that sort of drove your coalition to organize and then fight for some policy reforms in Iowa? What were some of the issues?
Absolutely. Well, so you might think it's unique that United Way was driving some of this legislation. We started a policy program about 7 years ago and used to work a lot more on work supports, you know, earned income tax credit, child care subsidy. We still work on those things, but in order to really move the needle, our collective United Ways in Iowa, we have a formal coalition, realized that if we want to increase the number of families who are financially stable, we've got to get into this business of looking at the workforce and how do we get more people that are unemployed and underemployed more fully employed. And moving them out of poverty. In Iowa, we've got about even 22% of working families cannot make their ends meet, can't meet their family's basic needs. So back in November of 2011, we had a big conference in Iowa where we invited lots of different stakeholders really to talk about just all the issues from adult literacy to sector strategies, everything that would encompass sort of a kind of a new and more modern workforce model. And that conference really helped to kind of build the case that we needed to convene on this issue. Especially people started to really see the need around adult literacy, I think. So over time, I mean, we put money and investments into the community substantially around these issues of adult literacy, sector strategies. We have a couple models in the state at different United Ways who are driving these different sector strategies. So I think we really were just looking to diversify the way that we looked at how we increase family income in Iowa. And so in particular, I think adult literacy really took off as a priority. So we convened a small coalition of about, I think it was about maybe 15 to 18 people, business leaders, nonprofits, and some government research leader types. to the table, and Andrea, who spoke a little earlier, was a helpful technical assistance guru for us. And so we convened that coalition back in the fall, and really just fall of 2012, and just really started to kind of say, okay, what are the key issues, and then narrow it down from there. And we got it down to about 4 issues, and those being adult literacy, primarily because Iowa has never put any state investment into adult literacy. So that was a big deal. We just didn't have enough resources to cover the need. We've got almost 300,000 working age Iowans who do not have a GED or a high school equivalent degree. So yeah, go ahead.
Given that backdrop, when your group started identifying issues, adult literacy, adult education started moving up to the top of your list, among other things. So what were the 4 key issues that you identified?
Right. So the 4 key issues, the top one again was just to get basically some adult basic education money in the state. We asked for $5 million. That would go to Department of Education and then be distributed to our community college system, which is excellent here in our state. Our second was to really invest in pathway navigators. We asked for $2 million, and that was really to ensure that these adult learners would stay in their programs, in their adult literacy programs that were connected to these career pathway programs at the community colleges, so that they would complete and earn their credential. So that was really just, keep those folks in that program. That was another big need identified, especially by the community colleges, because they know the barriers that these students were facing. Is it housing, child care? How can we help you navigate the system to get those supports that you need so you can stay in this program? That was the second. The third was really to create more capacity within the state to have these industry sector partnerships happening in all regions of the state. We have an excellent model here in Des Moines called Central Iowa Works, and we've got different career pathways established in financial services. It's the only one in the nation focused on financial services. We've got a career pathway around health, advanced manufacturing, and energy. And but really we want to see that spreading more across the state so that we're able to create more of this match between what are the jobs that need to be filled, what are those skills, and then match it up with the community college system or other employer-driven training systems to fill that skills gap.
Okay, so great. So Iowa is only one of a handful of states that doesn't contribute to adult ed, so that was certainly something you wanted to address. So how did you go once you identified the policy strategy? How did you work it in the State House or elsewhere? What was your plan of action or some action steps you took to move this proposal along?
Right. Well, we had a kind of a nice fancy document that that was put together in a policy agenda, very simply stated, but we really started to go around and talk with our legislators on both sides, the Senate and the House, and just build support. And we took business leaders with us to those meetings because those are really some of the best advocates, I think. They're part of the solution, and they really tell the story about why you need those skilled workers. And we had good data. We came with good data that was just irrefutable. We worked as a coalition to come down, to establish, like, these are the key data points that we are all speaking from. So we were all speaking from the same voice. We had our clear talking points, and we just stuck with our message. So, but I think it was well timed. I think the Senate, our Senate really wanted to champion this issue, and I think they were hearing about it not only from us and from our coalition and the community college system, but I think they were hearing about it in their communities. I mean, they realized that it was a very real issue, and with the economic slowdown and the changes in the economy, it kind of worked in our favor to build the case for why adult literacy was just so critical, and I think they finally had a sense of urgency around it. And granted, we've been talking about the issue for a couple of years, but we just hadn't had a really strong voice like we did this year. So I think with the Senate, then they just took it on. I mean, they used our data, they used our handout, you know, that we had, and they kind of ran with it, and then we were able to almost kind of co-write a bill with the Iowa Senate that included the 3 key pieces of our policy agenda. So that before session work is critical. We have a session that starts in early January, but I think that is a critical lesson learned for us, is that you just start early and just get that information out there in the legislators' hands, find your champions, get it out before session starts. And some other ways that we got it out into their hands was, you know, we had different legislative breakfasts that occurred in different parts of the state. We encouraged other United Ways to host, you know, coffees with their legislators. Anything they could do before session starts to get the word out, I think, is a good thing.
That's excellent. That's excellent advice. Getting started early and building those relationships is extremely important. So did you do some communications too? Did you all write an op-ed or something like that?
Yeah, so during session, we had one op-ed that we wrote that here in Des Moines, and then we encouraged our other United Ways to put an op-ed in their papers, and we got them in 2 other communities in Cedar Rapids and Quad Cities, where we had some really critical leadership, especially in the House, that we needed to convince. Our Senate is democratically controlled, our House is Republican controlled, so we have a nice balance. But we had a little bit more convincing to do with the House. It wasn't all like, you know, roses. So we had some work to do. But yeah, the op-ed was great, and we had business leaders, at least here in Des Moines, we had business leaders have their name on it. So, I mean, Andrea and I wrote it, but then we had our board chair, who's head of a corporation. We had kind of in second in line at Principal Financial Group, which is a major financial services corporation, Fortune 500 business. And then also Wells Fargo, we had one of their top business leaders sign on to it as well. So that garnered some attention, and then of course I copied that article and put that in every legislator's mailbox. Yeah. Oh yeah. No, we didn't stop. We stopped at nothing. We had a grassroots postcard campaign. We did a lot of different things. Grassroots postcard campaign, where it's just another way to kind of make a touch point with your legislator besides a call or an email and an in-person meeting. Those are all great, and we did all those things like 100 times over. But additionally, we got these out to the community colleges. We had students write into their legislators, so they were probably about 2,000 postcards that came into the State House from any number of different sorts of constituents. Our board members.
It's Senator Klausmeier. I'm here. Just.
We'll be right with you. We'll be right with you, Senator. Thanks for joining us. So, Sarah, in the minute we have left for your session or so the bottom line is you did all that legwork, you did the strategizing, you had endorsers and partners, you spent some time down at the State House, you had your communications campaign, if you will, with op-eds and the mailer, which I think is an interesting idea. So the end result of this was a very significant investment at the state level for strengthening statewide adult education career pathways.
Yes.
And it was all pretty much done on investment and in the budget. So where specifically did that money go? Is it just $5.5 million directly to adult basic ed?
Right. So there is, within Department of Education here in Iowa, there's a department that handles that fund. They get the federal funds that come in for adult literacy, the small amount that it is. This is a much more significant pot of money. So that all goes to Department of Ed, and then they distribute it through the community colleges through an existing funding formula. And so it's a significant amount of money to our community colleges across the state. to help those 300,000 Iowans. And I think there'll be some marketing campaigns trying to get people in the door. I think that's part of it. It's just getting them in there to know that that's a service that's. And again, that just to reaffirm that state allocation is more than our federal funding. So it's great. Now the career pathways funding that we got, we did, or rather the navigator funding and the sector funding that we got, that was a combined total of $5 million. So again, that's going through Department of Ed to the community colleges, and there's some flexibility based on their need. Do they want to hire a navigator or 2 or 3? Do they want to hire a coordinator for the sector partnerships? Things like that. So yeah, it's significant, and we're just really excited to not be one of the last states in the nation that did not put any money towards adult literacy. And we're just really hopeful that this helps a lot of people that are just struggling to find the right path. And I just want to reiterate that I think combining the adult literacy with a training program, that's the goal. It's these integrated programs. That's what our community colleges are working towards. That's what United Way is are pushing. So we're thrilled.
Great. Well, thank you, Sarah. That's congratulations on your legislative success to really to everyone in Iowa, especially the students that will participate or benefit from this. So Iowa is one example of United Way and other stakeholders sort of driving this legislative change in their state with a significant output. We're going to go to Virginia in a minute and hear a little bit about another state, and then Senator Klausmeier has joined us from Maryland, so we'll be going to Maryland after that. But I want to welcome Elizabeth Creamer. Elizabeth's the Director of Education and Workforce with the Office of Governor Bob McDonnell in Virginia, and it's with the Department of Ed. Welcome, Elizabeth. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's with the Secretary of Education office. The Department of Ed's different.
Okay, I stand corrected as usual. Thank you.
Sorry.
Well, anyway, so welcome today. So Virginia had a mixed bag in the legislature this year. And again, on this call, we're trying to bring you the perspective of a community organization like nonprofit, representative from a governor and the state side, and then soon a representative from the legislature. But in Virginia, so you had a mixed bag this year. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what some of the things that the state was trying to propose and some of the things that worked out and some that didn't?
Virginia has a very ambitious vision for workforce development. Governor McDonnell has 3 primary goals for workforce development, and that's to drive post-secondary credential attainment, associate degrees, and baccalaureate degrees. We have a 100,000 new degree goal for that, and we wanted to bring the traditional workforce partners more into that effort. A big goal to really drive the pipeline, increase the pipeline of skilled technicians and trades workers for those middle skills jobs that National Skills Coalition and the National Governors Association has written about so ably. And in Virginia, we're aligning that work with priority industry sectors that we've identified: advanced manufacturing, information technology, health careers, et cetera. And the third major goal is to better align and coordinate for enhanced performance and increased cost efficiencies, the education and workforce system. That's the only reason I corrected you. Actually, my position was created by Governor McDonnell's administration specifically to stand as a liaison between education, commerce and trade, and health and human services. So we have 26 programs we're working with, federally and state-funded programs. Everything from high school, career, and technical education to the, to rehabilitative services and veterans education and employment programs and Workforce Investment Act and Wagner-Pfizer. I won't go through all the lists. Most of you would be familiar with what they are. So there's 26 programs across 9 agencies. And we did successfully pass very significant legislation related to our state WIB, whereby the state WIB now has some responsibilities for all 26 of those programs, including Perkins, bringing together Perkins and WIA. Our state's been about this alignment work for some time. We're one of the few states where responsibility at the state level for the Workforce Investment Act is under the community colleges. So that marriage of the traditional education sector, including universities, by the way, and the State Council for Higher Education, but that marriage between those education partners and workforce we see as critical. So in that guise, we were able to get through the state legislature $9.7 million in additional funding for this education workforce system that included some really significant steps forward for us. Our state had previously not put any funding, for instance, into non-credit training, and we now provide $3.5 million a year in this biannual budget for non-credit training that partners with business and industry and the community college and leads to workforce credentials like certifications and licensures. And that's part of the pathway. You know, $3.9 million for manufacturing centers that provide training on a regional level for everything from dual enrollment high school students to displaced adults seeking help through one-stops, and a variety of other programs. Made some policy changes, for instance, so that workforce training programs could access the Higher Education Equipment Trust Fund, which previously they had not been able to do so. In the previous legislative session, we had passed some pivotal legislation that requires that standard high school diploma graduates, those students that are not earning an advanced diploma that basically is targeted to college readiness, the standard diploma students will be required to earn some type of assessment of work readiness, such as the career readiness certificate or a certification. Those were our successes. The irony is that all of this movement forward has been under the umbrella of a statewide career pathways work group working with the Virginia Workforce Council, which is our state WIB, that has brought together these 9 agencies and really encouraged career pathways sector strategies, and especially collaborative planning and funding of statewide initiatives like our statewide adult and high school career coaches program. The irony is that we tried to move forward legislation around career pathways as well as a budget item, and that alone of all of the legislative and budget items that we put forward was unsuccessful in getting through the state legislature, which has given us some pause and lots of opportunities to reflect and learn from the lessons of the past General Assembly session.
So several items passed, more of the funding that you had just previously talked about, and Virginia is known for your career pathways planning, and you have a statewide framework, and you've been doing great work on career pathways for a while. So, but you're unable to get that $1.75 million funding for career pathways. What do you think that is? What do you think that is?
Okay, understanding that this is my hypothesis, and I've been in this position, you know, less than 18 months. I have a couple of suppositions. One, because I've been exploring this, and we are moving forward strategies for next year. But one is we needed a brand. Interestingly enough, in Virginia, career pathways are all the programs that accelerate learning, articulate to the next higher level of education or training, drive towards certifications, partner with business and industry, include career planning and career coaching, and I won't go through all those elements. But career pathways as a generic term was too, I think it was too educational and not, it wasn't easily identified by the legislators as a name that was going to drive that pipeline, better preparing and expanding the pipeline of those middle skilled workers. So compared to give credit to states where credit's due, skills to compete out of Maryland or Work Smart out of Kentucky, All Hands on Deck out of Minnesota, Skilled Iowa. There's a sense of a, you know, a time-specific, really urgent drive in all of those names. And as a result, we're now contracting with a marketing firm for some branding because we needed something that was catchy and definitely more suggestive of business and industry interests, I think, than career pathways, which we were told sounds a little too educational and even secondary education.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one thing. The second is that unlike Iowa, and I listened to the speaker from Iowa with a great deal of interest, because we've got the community college system working with both local WIBs and local community colleges, it wasn't as if we did not put forward that all the funds would go to the WIBs or the community colleges. We find from one region to the next in Virginia, and Virginia has very culturally and economically distinct regions. We find that regional leadership can really vary so that the WIB may be the more natural fit for the sector strategies and career pathways in one region and the community college in another. I think there's advantages to that. The disadvantage in driving a campaign for legislation and funding was that we didn't have a clear agency or organization. Everyone had a stake in this, but no one had a bigger stake, and therefore it wasn't in any agency's top priorities in terms of this legislative session, if that makes sense. So that multi-agency can help, but it also can prove challenging in that you have to start very early to educate the agencies as to the return on investment for them, and to make sure that they're going to not just support, but enthusiastically and actively support. So I think that was part of it. The other thing is that the multi-agency piece of it led to some concerns among legislators that we were replicating or duplicating governance structures that already existed through the state WIB. There was some confusion as to how career pathways wasn't an overlay that was in addition to the existing system rather than a transformation of the system.
Right.
So quite frankly, Virginia sees career pathways. That is our workforce model for veterans programs, for secondary to post-secondary programs, for adult education programs. But the messaging that we moved forward was almost too broad, too generic, too focused on governance. And in retrospect, I would have pared down the message, focused on pipelines for middle skills jobs, and maybe ask for more specific and discrete items from the state legislator, like perhaps just ask for adult ed as a part of our pathway system, rather than trying to move forward the whole system, which is very large, very complex. Now, we're doing some things to address that, too. When you're dealing with 26 programs, there's a really critical need to educate legislators. It is vast and it is confusing. So we're trying to develop now, we're supposed to release in the next month or so, well in time for the next session, a summary of Virginia's workforce system where we'll pare this down, list the primary programs, show the linkages, show the federal and state funds that exist for services, and charge ourselves to do that in a pamphlet, a couple of website pages, and a short report. Because we've got to break down this material so it's more easily absorbed, understood, and appreciated. We've also launched a report card so that we're now able to show progress against metrics that were identified by our state WIB for all 26 programs in common. We're trying to get these kinds of transparent materials out there that show the accountability and the performance of the system across programs, so that we don't get caught up in the weeds of trying to explain 26 different programs, for which in fact we envision career pathways as an operative model for all of them.
given all the work that has happened in Virginia, your basic lesson learned walking away from some of this is the need to reach out to legislators, communicate a little bit more clearly about what your strategy is so that they understand it, and maybe use some other stakeholders or others or business or somebody to help you carry that message to employers.
And use our regional network. Our career pathway system's strong because of our strong regional career pathway, and we could have earlier deployed the strength of the regions. Branding and marketing, keeping the message simple, focusing on middle skills jobs, which our legislator really cares about, and not taking for granted that workforce is going to be an easy ride through the legislator.
Absolutely. Yep. I think a lot of states would agree with that. It's great advice. Now, we do have, who is that, Judy? Yeah, Judy from Minnesota asked if there was a link to the legislation for your state WIB, and that's something we can send out later. The state WIB legislation that did some of the alignment and coordination at the state WIB, that does have a bill number, correct?
Yes, yes, and I mean, I could tell you that now, but I assume you just want me to get you the link after this call.
Yes, we'll make sure the link goes out. That would be great. Well, thank you, Elizabeth. We'll be coming back to you. There's some questions starting to pile up on our board, so we'll be coming back to you. Thank you very much for your rundown on Virginia and being so candid about some of the lessons learned. I think one of the things I've learned doing state policy is things don't happen automatically, quickly, and always that first year. Sometimes it's a sustained campaign, if you will, over a couple of years to get something passed and to get a state investment in workforce. And so I think Maryland is a good example of that. Right now we're going to drive north a little bit from Virginia to Maryland. I'll welcome Senator Klausmeier from the 8th District in Baltimore County. Welcome, Senator Klausmeier. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
All right. So you're not a workforce expert, although you're becoming one. You haven't dedicated your life to workforce, but you are a legislator in Maryland. You have been for how many years have you been in the legislature?
19.
19. And I know you've been very active in the community in education and healthcare and a variety of other issues besides the legislature. So why was there a need to get involved in workforce legislation in Maryland, Senator?
Well, I guess it goes back a few years, maybe 3 or 4 years, and I was invited to the National Conference of State Legislators, and along with Annie B. Casey, they invited me to a working families conference, and so I thought, well, I would just go and see what it was all about, and it really has sparked my interest quite immensely. And last year, one of the things that we talked about was how we can get people back to work and how we can get people to advance in work. And the group that was there, each state, there's maybe 7 or 8 different states that are present. We break out into our own states and sit and talk about it and talking, and then all of a sudden, as someone said, how about this, employment advancement right now, earned. So that's how we started with that particular program. And the question was, how do we, get this thing moving? So part of our plan that we wrote while we were there at the conference was to, when we got back to Baltimore or back to Maryland, we would start with some meetings. So from there, we got back, and last summer we met with the Department of Labor and Licensing, who does a lot of our work study kind of things like that and educational kind of things. And we sat down with members of Dollar. We sat with folks that, some of the nonprofits that really are looking to hire folks and get people on the job roles here in Maryland. We sat with someone from the governor's office and other legislators, and we began discussing how this would all work and what we would be doing. And I guess the purpose of the whole issue was to try to collaborate with industry and local government and the nonprofits to create the industry partnerships to advance the skills of our state workforce and all the folks that are involved in their job hunting. So I guess as time went on last year, we became more involved with the Governor's Workforce Investment Board, and our next meetings expanded to the Department of Economic Development. And I think as I say these, I think it's just so important that we have all of our agencies working together, rowing in the same way. I think that's of utmost importance. And as one of the questions was, what do you think the successes were? And along the way, I think everyone was just excited about the program. We had a definition of what we wanted to do. We had that purpose, and in the end, we were able to get the governor to actually include it in his package of bills for 2013. And that we felt was a real accomplishment, and he was very, very proud of that. He touted that bill in his State of the State. And at the beginning, we got $2 million for the program, of which when we had our hearing in the Senate Finance Committee, the governor actually he presented the bill. I was there as a senator, and there were some folks from the President of the Senate's office. Vicki was there. So we had a really good group that originally presented the bill. And when the bill was finished, the entire committee was excited about it. And the one senator said, the only problem we have with this bill is there's not enough money. We need more money. So for the duration of the session, everyone was talking to the governor about putting some more money in, and in the end, he actually did put $2.5 million. So now we have $4.5 million in the budget for this program. And if there's anything different that anybody would like to know that we did, I just wish we'd have done it sooner. Wow. And learned about it sooner.
Yeah,
and, pardon me?
Yeah, I was going to say this is the biggest state investment in workforce for at least the last 12 years in the state of Maryland. And right. As we just flipped up this on our screen, I know you're not in front of a computer, but there is a picture there of Governor O'Malley testifying on behalf of the EARN bill. And on one side of him is the Secretary of Labor, the other side is Secretary of Economic Development. The brown here all the way at the end is you testifying. The Senate President's office, there were at that hearing, there were businesses testifying. I believe there were 13 or 14 people testifying, and nobody opposed the bill.
Right, right.
It was really quite an example of collaboration with the department, the nonprofits, the governor's office. That really was quite I've never heard or seen anything at that level.
It, to me, was amazing, because I know how every department always tries to top each other, but they let the Department of Labor and Licensing, they let them take the lead, and everybody's been working with them, and that's what's going on right now. What's happened with me, as you had said at the very beginning, I was never an expert on this by any means, and I still am not. I'm still learning a lot, but it's brought myself closer to the people that are really going to make this happen. So the dollar is going to be having grants, and they're developing the strategic industry partnerships, and so they're looking at all the skills that folks need, and they're just going to be working with business and as well as state agencies. So it's very exciting.
It is. It's a great story, and you know, your perspective as a legislator, being some of the energy behind the developing this bill and getting stakeholder input and trying to you know, to get as much input as possible to craft a good bill. It really is great to hear that, you know, a state senator, a state delegate, and the Speaker's office or the President's office are working together along with those other groups. So,
right.
so
And what I foresee now is, I have just come to the conclusion, we as legislatures want all the different agencies to work together. And at this point, I envision trying to get one of the three of our Senate committees to work together, because we have the Budget and Tax who are going to be looking at the money, and then we have the Educational and Health. We really appreciate their expertise in education, and then we have the finance, the business end of it. So if I can get all three of those committees together, that will really help as well. So.
Now, one of our audience asked a question of, is labor involved in Maryland? And I believe labor was supportive of the EARN program.
Yes.
It was passed. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Yep. And they would be
labor plays a big part in Maryland.
Right, and they can join in any of the regional collaborations in putting together an application for this, as I understand your
yes.
That's great.
And labor is involved in the Governor's Workforce Investment Board. They're sitting right there at the table with all of us. So besides the business, we do have the labor.
Great. Okay, well, that is a great example. I know you're out and about. I have one more question for you, Senator. I know you're out and about talking to businesses all the time. What advice would you have? What advice would you have for our listeners today? We have everybody from community college folks to workforce board people to adult educators to representatives of local labor organizations. What advice would you have for these folks in terms of working with their legislators on crafting good workforce bills?
I think it's so important to include the legislators, and again, just to sit down and start the discussion. It's so important. And as I said, I knew some folks in labor and licensing, but I could call up, and if I had a problem, they might help me. But now I'm like an integral part in what they're doing, because I've worked on that relationship, and I can just pick up the phone and call now and say, hey, what are we doing about this, or what are we doing about that? And especially with the EARN, we are having a meeting in a couple weeks to see how we are going to get EARN out into the community. And again, I think it's all about relationships and how you work with people.
Well, that's great. So Maryland's EARN program started as $2 million, ended up as $4.5 million for strategic industry partnerships. And again, those grants run by the State Department of Labor Licensing Regulation that will do regional grants to collaborations of businesses, community colleges, WIBs, and community-based organizations.
Yeah, and I believe we're going to have a website called Train Maryland, and that will be in consultation with the Department of Economic Development and the Department of Information Technology. So.
Well, that's great, Senator Klausmeier. Thank you very much for the overview on Maryland. I know Maryland has lots to be proud of the way that that bill came together. And again, it's Maryland's largest state investment, at least in a dozen years, in the workforce system and human capital investments.
Yes, and I do have to say, we are very conscious of we want really good outcomes. So we're going to be working really, really hard on this. So.
All right. Well, thank you very much. What we're going to do now is open it up for questions from the field. So if my guests would mind staying with me for a little bit, I'm going to turn it over to Jen Gable here. And Jen's going to tell you if you got a question that you want to ask, and we'd like to have a little conversation going. She'll tell you how to do it.
All right. If you do have a question, please be sure to raise your hand by clicking on that hand icon on the left side of your panel, and we will unmute your lines one at a time. You also, of course, have the option to type your question into the question box, and we'll try to read as many as we can. Just a reminder, if you've dialed in on your telephone, you must have the telephone option selected in the audio box. If you're using the speakers on your computer, you have to have the mic and speakers selected. If you're using this option, make sure that you have a microphone on your computer before raising your hand. Like Jesse said earlier, if you don't have a webcam, you probably don't have a microphone, so you'll need to dial in on your phone. Just select that telephone option, and the 800 number will be listed at the bottom of your control panel. And with that, we will open it up for questions.
Do you have anybody
All
on the
right,
line?
we have several people.
Okay.
So first is going to be Sarah. Sarah Labady, we're opening up your line.
Hi, Sarah.
Are you there? Oh, and it looks like we lost Sarah. That's okay. We're going to actually open up Ken Archer's line. Ken, are you there?
Yeah, Ken, what's your question?
This is exactly what it is. Feels so legit with this couple of here.
Okay. Let's try this one more
more
time. Dave Griffin, are you there? Dave, it looks like you're signed on your computer. Do you have a question? All right.
All right. Well, we'll try to fix that. We'll come to some of the questions that were called in, that are sent in. Hold on.
Let's see. Do that one?
Go ahead and read the question if you
So
want.
this one's actually from Ken Archer. Since we couldn't get you on the line, Ken, we have what is common to these initiatives? Career pathways, IBEST integration of skills, and adult basic ed is coordination across multiple funding streams and service providers. Who most often leads these coordinations? Is it the state WIBs, the local WIBs, or the community colleges?
I think that's a good question. Actually, I'm going to ask Sarah and Elizabeth to answer that a little bit. In your states, how, when you get to the regional level and you've got a lot of different partners involved in developing a career pathways initiative, Elizabeth, how do you talk a little bit about whether WIBs or community colleges would be the right one? How do they organize and lead at the regional level for a sectors or career pathways initiative?
You know, I don't know yet if this is a plus or a minus. I suspect it's a plus, but we genuinely have distributive leadership. And by and large, we've had statewide regional career pathway grants before that have been funded by foundations and other sources. And we have found a lot of success in letting the regions determine whether the WIB is going to be the fiscal agent or the community college, or in Virginia, we even have entities called regional higher education centers, which provide both community college and university credit programs as well as non-credit workforce training programs. You know, what the regional leader is can really vary, and we've chosen to leave that flexible and fluid.
Okay, and I think a number of states are starting to take that approach too. It's not all WIBs or not always a community college or not always a community-based organizations. We do know there is sometimes the tension that certain groups could get left out in the regional area, but I suspect it's all in developing solid relationships, as Senator Klausmeier was talking about, at that local or regional level. And in Iowa, Sarah, we have a question about the role of the Pathway Navigator. Could you talk a little bit about who that navigator is? Is it a case manager in the one-stop, or is it a hybrid or a new type of position? Could you discuss that for a minute?
Right, and I think it's flexible. I think that the way we wrote the legislation is that there's some flexibility with how the community college decides to structure that position. But yeah, I mean, I think in a sense they are kind of like a caseworker, really just helping them understand. It's kind of a new, I mean, it's really sort of a new model. Only a couple community colleges have a position like that right now that I'm aware of in Iowa, at least. And so to really say that it's important and put a stake in the ground, I think is great for the state to recognize that. But yeah, just kind of a caseworker model. I think literally it's being worked on right now by the community colleges. And I think the employees that will work closely with the navigator are having a stake in how that position is created, which I think is great. And I would hope that then there's some interface with the Iowa Workforce Development with the caseworkers. We've seen some reduction in staff, which I'm sure other states have as well, just with budget cuts over the past couple of years. So this being kind of on-site at the community college, I think is going to be a really big deal and a big help. Hopefully that answers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're going to try one more call from the field and see if we can get.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead. Who is this? Okay. Do we have anybody else on the line? Okay. So one of the questions we got from the field was how much each in Iowa and Maryland are required to be spent on training. And I'm going to let you talk, Sarah, about Iowa for a minute. I know, but Senator Klausmeier, I don't think there was a specific amount required to be spent on training, but I think it was the intent of the legislation in Maryland that most of it was to be spent on training out in the field?
Yes, yes. I think the training, and I'm assuming the putting the website up, that may take some of that money, but the majority is going to be for the grants, and I'm hoping that will even be enough for that. So.
Right. Okay. Right. And I believe in it was the intent of the department, and when they developed their regulations, to put as much money into the actual training as possible.
Yes.
And let's see. Sarah, was there any requirements on the amount of training that would be spent in Iowa?
No, I mean, I think really most of it is going into the training. I'm just looking at the bill again. There was I didn't mention this earlier, there is a dedicated stream of that $5 million specifically for English language learners, which is just fantastic that that was maintained in the bill. We were excited about that. It's about 20% of that $5 million is specifically for English language learners. So I think the departmental administration fee is pretty minor, and they just get that out through an existing funding structure and get that out to the communities to be spent on the training for adult literacy.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, we're going to try another call from the field, and this time we'll go to Stephanie Powers. The line is open, we think. Stephanie, so are you there?
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me, Eric?
Yes, Stephanie, I sure can. Hope you're well.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm fine, thanks. Thanks. This has been pretty interesting, so I appreciate the information today. The question that I wanted to ask is directed toward the Virginia presenter. And being a resident of Virginia, I'm also interested in this. But I'm kind of curious, since she's isolated communications as a really big component of maybe being successful next time, where do you find the resources and the money to add almost like a campaign component, an education campaign component of members of the legislature and, of course, important stakeholders who can take the message to the legislature about the importance of their vote on this appropriation? Because a lot of times, as we know, we can't spend precious resources on communication strategies, especially when you are campaigning perhaps from the state level or from a governmental level. And certainly a lot of nonprofits can't add that into their budgets. So I'm just curious, in order for this to be successful next time, it seems like a really important component is this communications and education component. How are you going to fund that? How are you going to make that happen?
Yep.
Well,
Elizabeth?
I've talked some about the challenges of working with 26 programs and 9 agencies. Some of the advantages, because we really do have a very strong it's been in existence about 5 years, a very strong statewide career pathways work group. Adult ed is on it, community colleges are staffing it, the WIA is represented on it. We've got the major stakeholders, and there are 2 answers. Firstly, we saw with, for instance, the integrated manufacturing centers, we got out business and industry for those. Our message was very clear. There was the need spoke to business and industry interests, and they came and met with legislators both during the General Assembly session and prior to that. But secondly, we have done some collaborative funding. While none of our programs can provide the resources to produce communications materials, we have managed to, all of the entities, put something into the mix to produce a couple of key products. So I would say there's a power of networking. You know, the WIBs have connections, the community colleges have connections, local adult education programs, which in our state are under the Department of Education and not the community college system. They have connections. You know, if we play to those local connections to legislators and business and industry, and if we can rally our troops around a message and a need that really is integral to business and industry interests, we can get the message across.
Well, it's an excellent question, Stephanie, and we also often get, you know, a lot of the work of the states that we work with is often campaign-style work, and we talk to sites sometimes about doing, you know, unearned communications as well, you know, through op-eds or meetings in the state capitals, but the funding of that is often a challenge for some of the sites we work with. Thank you for your question. We have another question from C. Michael Ferraro. Are you there, Michael?
Hi guys, it's Michael.
Hi.
Good. I actually asked the question earlier about Iowa and Maryland, how much money they were spent on training, and I'm just a bit surprised that the senator from Maryland, would write legislation for training and not know how much was going to be spent on training. It's just surprising to me.
The reason being is because it's through dollar, and we receive the money, and they're working on the different grants. So, I mean, that's what this program is about, to give grants out, and we're working in the future to figure out who's going to be getting the grants and how much money they're going to be getting, and we expect to use it all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
well,
and that was part of the planning was to allow the department with their stakeholders and partners to figure out the regulations and the grant program and exactly how much was to be required to spend on training.
Correct.
So they're working on that.
I can just tell you my experience in Virginia has been that when grant programs are put forward like that, less than half of it actually goes to training. So just a suggestion, when you do something like that, you should actually write either the percent or the dollar amount so that more money goes to training and less goes to administration. Just from personal experience.
Let me just say, though, that come this January, come January, they are going to be reporting to us exactly where the money went and exactly what they're doing. And by us, I mean the General Assembly. So that is, they have a criteria that they have to report to us about. So,
I would strongly encourage.
You know, so because we want to see the results, and we want to know who's participating. And
I think you'll be surprised. I think you'll be surprised at the numbers when you see them, Senator.
Okay. Well, I hope I'm not. I hope they're all going to.
I hope you're not too. I'm just giving you personal experience. That's all.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that Maryland has is a very aggressive state stat program that will be watching this program probably more carefully than anybody else except the legislature. So I know there'll be a lot of accountability there. But Michael's question is a good one on training.
Well, this is Elizabeth, and I think it's part of a trend too. Virginia's Workforce Council legislation that I referenced earlier includes a provision that the Workforce Council will receive reports that include a breakdown of how much money and the percentage of funds received for all workforce programs were spent on training. So, I mean, clearly this is an issue of transparency and accountability that is becoming more vocal across states.
Okay, very good. One more question. Jennifer keeps going off of it, so it's hard for me to read it. Oh, it was a Colorado question about the Colorado bill. I don't know if that's competitive. The Colorado bill is dealing with community colleges, and it's funding directly to community colleges for whoever asked that question. Okay, well, we're coming to the end of our time. I want to thank Elizabeth Creamer from Virginia, Sarah Ramsey from Iowa, and Senator Klausmeier from the great state of Maryland for joining us today. I really appreciate you giving your time and your insights on the lessons learned in this particular session. I also want to thank Jesse Hogg-Leslie in our Cincinnati office and Andrea Gillespie in our Dallas office for helping out earlier on the call today. We've got a few questions lined up in our queue. We'll be getting back to you on that. We'll answer those questions with you directly. If you have any other questions about any of the things we conversed today, please send any of us an email. I believe we're listed on the last slide. You can send us an email and we'll make sure we get that question answered to you, or get it to one of our panelists if you'd like to speak directly to them. So on behalf of the National Skills Coalition, I want to thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Elizabeth, Sarah, and Senator Klausmeier, and we'll see you at the next audio update for the state policy team in the fall. Thank you very much.